Yeah, so thank you everybody for joining us today to go through the program year 2023 application. So the application process has changed quite a bit this year. So I am going to take some time to really walk through what you can expect coming up into this next funding cycle, and then we will go through how to actually go through the application, what to look for, what to consider, and end with some question and answers. So as Paula mentioned, please use the questions pod for your questions because that will create a transcript for our FAQ. And when you are asking questions, try to be as specific as possible. So if you say something like, and what does that mean? Well, if 30 minutes from now I look at a question that says, what does that mean? I don't know what I might have been talking about at the time. So try to be very specific when you do ask a question. So just some quick introductions. So my name is Maisie Moore. I am the manager of the program management section at the ODOT Office of Transit. I will be doing the presentation today, but the other program coordinators in the program section are joining us. So I am going to ask them to give a brief introduction of themselves, and they may be chiming in at some point, answering questions or whatnot. So without further ado, Juana, if you want to introduce yourself. Alex.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Ewers. I'm the 5339 and Intercity Bus Program Coordinator here for the Office of Transit.
Hi, everybody. I'm the 5310 Program Coordinator here, branch.
Hello, I'm Pamela Pate. I am the Statewide Mobility Coordinator.
Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Craves. I'm the 5311 Rural Transit Coordinator.
Sorry, I can't count. All right, thank you guys very much. As I mentioned, they will be on standby and maybe chiming in as we get to the question and answer section. So just a few items to note before we get started. I do want to let everyone know that the workshop will be recorded and accessible later. An FAQ document will be distributed with the question and answers from the workshop. And this PowerPoint will also be shared with the applicants following the presentation. So for the workshop objectives, as I mentioned earlier, by the end of this workshop, participants should understand what the application workshop is and how it relates to the funding process, the steps in the application process for ODOT funding, and best practices for grant applications. We will be sending an evaluation to the participants so that we can determine how effective this workshop was. We are doing a new process this year with how we're approaching the workshop. So it's always nice after the first time you do something to really know if it met the objectives of what you were trying to accomplish. So any feedback you can give would be very appreciated. It is a brief evaluation. It should not take you long at all to do. So as I'm going through this workshop, if you have any thoughts about how it could be better, please feel free to jot those down so that you can express those later in the evaluation. So for the agenda for today, I'm going to go through the application updates. So there has been some pretty significant changes to how applicants request funding through our office. I will then go through the available funds for the 2023 program year. I will talk about how you access the application, steps in completing the application, best practices, and then we will finish out with the question and answer portion. So just as a recap of our funding cycle, you are currently at the second step of our cycle. The first step was obviously the letter of intent. So you went through that process, you were deemed eligible, and now you are attending the application workshop where you will learn how to hopefully submit a successful application. And the next step will be the application period where you will formally apply, followed by our process of reviewing the application. We will announce any awards in July of this year, and then we will complete the projects. So some important dates for the application process. The application will be released on March 28th, and then it will be due on May 4th. So that's a little over 5 weeks to complete your application. And then application announcements will take place by the end of July. If we can get them out sooner, that's always great, but it should be no later than the end of July. Okay, so the major change for this program cycle is that we are moving to one funding application. So I am going to spend the first part of the workshop just kind of explaining what that means. So just for some background, ODOT is moving to one funding application for all project requests. The reason that we're making this change is that it will maximize eligibility for our applicants, reduce duplication of effort for applicants, leverage state and federal funds more effectively, and understand statewide needs for transit projects. So in our prior process, people would basically have to seek out ODOT funding. They would have to understand what funding we offer, what funding would be the best match for the projects that they're trying to deliver, and then also, would have the burden of then, if they want to be eligible for multiple programs, they would have to submit separate applications. So by just having one application where you can just express what you're trying to accomplish and give a little bit more information about who you are, ODOT can then make you eligible for any funding program that we have, which ultimately maximizes your eligibility. And then on the topic of reducing duplication of effort, in that same regard, if you're having to apply for multiple funding programs, you are obviously submitting your organization information over and over again, sometimes submitting the same supporting documentation over and over again. So by moving to one application, we are consolidating all of that information into one spot so that you do not have to continuously input that information over and over again. And, by getting all of the requests at one time for all projects in the state, ODOT can consider our federal and state funds and how they might best be deployed to meet the project needs statewide. So, if you have capital projects that require extensive procurement, it might be better to have those projects funded out of state GRF, which is more lenient than federal funding. And instead of making you request those state funds or making you have that foresight and understanding the strategy behind that funding, ODOT and us as subject matter experts can make those decisions on your behalf. So this is just kind of a visual representation of the old process versus the new process. The old process applications were submitted in two platforms. Some were in Black Hat, some were in FormStack. Under the new process, we are strictly using FormStack. We will no longer be using Black Hat for applications. The applications used to be separate for each program, and now it's one application for all programs. Previously, applications were considered on a program by program basis, and now they are considered on a project by project basis. So that means if you submit 5 projects, you might get funding from multiple sources versus before you were submitting 5 projects under one program. So that was the only consideration we could make for your project needs. And then finally, the prior format of the application workshop was we would do a lot of discussion on the program itself and the requirements of the program, and then we would also talk about how to apply. But since we are no longer basing applications on programs, we are able to transition the application workshop to be primarily focused on how to submit a successful application, and instead we will be conducting program orientations for successful applicants in the fall. So once you you are awarded, you will be notified of what programs are funding your projects, and then you will be invited to attend the program orientation before the program year begins so that you can meet your program coordinator, talk about the requirements of the program and how you would successfully deliver the projects. So the new process flows, first you submit your application in FormStack. We then go through our internal approval, review and approval process, and we will make award announcements via email. Once you've been notified of what you're awarded, you will then go into Black Cat and submit projects for your awarded projects. So in the past, you would be in Black Cat and you would be creating projects and then attaching them to your application. But in some cases, you might be creating projects that ultimately were never funded if they weren't selected. So instead of all of that effort, we're being very intentional in how we're utilizing Black Cat, and you only need to go in and create projects for the projects that were selected for the amounts that were awarded. And that's a crucial step because you will still be doing your invoicing, and our contracts will be generated out of Black Cat. So we do need that project information in order to create those connections in the system. And once you create all of your projects and we are set up to start all of the paperwork and get the process moving, you will then be invited to attend your program orientation, as I just mentioned, where you will get to learn more about the program and the requirements. And then finally, we will be doing contracts late fall, early winter ahead of the program year. And those contracts will, and award letters, will fully outline the funding sources for your projects, for your records, so that you know exactly where the money is coming from. So just to kind of summarize some of the points I just made, again, applicants no longer determine the program best suited for their needs. The applicants request the projects. ODOT program staff then play matchmaker, so to speak, to the available funds. By qualifying projects for as many funding sources as possible, ODOT can leverage federal and state funding together to fund as many projects as possible, break down communication barriers between program staff and understand more holistically statewide need of the dollars, and then make sure projects are best matched to the funding source that allows them the most flexibility and opportunity for success. So again, you know, on the topic of potentially capital purchases that would require extensive procurement compliance, it might be more flexible to award it under state funding and, you know, remove some of that burden from the locals and things like that. You know, those are some examples of where we could really see some benefits to this process. So I do want to speak briefly to the available funding that we have going into this upcoming application cycle, just so you know kind of what we're working with. So I do want to make a quick note that on the federal side, we've only received partial federal fiscal year 2022 apportionments. So we do anticipate these funding amounts increasing, and we do have a available funding section on our transit funding webpage. And as soon as we have our full apportionments, we will be updating those there, and we can send out a notification once those have been updated. But for now, this is what we have available, so this is what we're operating from. For rural areas of the state, we have a little over 2.6 million available. In small urban areas, we have a little bit over 1.2 million available. Toledo, we have dedicated funding of a little over $1.5 million. In Akron, we have dedicated funding of a little over $600,000. Youngstown, $450,000. Dayton, $770,000.